think we will go ahead and get started. We might have some people that jump in, but that's okay. So this is our North Inner room. So just to make sure you are where you want to be,
Yes.
we do have a little bit of kind of like a background presentation I can start with. Um, it's pretty quick, and then most of it is focused on North Inner. How familiar are you with the plan so far? Like, is this your first touch point with it? Have you looked into yours?
This is my first touch point with the North Inner plan.
Perfect. All right, well, then I will go ahead and get started. Our first few slides, oh, and it looks like we do have one more person joining us. Welcome. We were just about to get started. Again, this is the North Inner Plan Room. So just to make sure you are where you want to be, we're going to get started with kind of a brief overview and then some specific information on North Inner. And then I'll go ahead and open the floor up for any questions and we can go through whatever you all would like to look at. So just to start, welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to be walking us through the North Inner Community Area Plan in this first hour and how it may impact you and your community. And like I mentioned, at the once I'm through this, we'll just kind of have a conversation and we can talk through any questions you all have. So, kind of as a little bit of background, you may have heard this before, but the reason we did develop these plans is that Charlotte's been continuously growing for decades. We're projected to keep growing. And as a response to this projected growth, the city adopted the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan in 2021, which defines our 20-year vision for growth here and change in Charlotte. And the plan essentially calls for future growth to benefit as many people as possible. So, while the comprehensive plan provides that kind of broader vision for our community, there's also other levels of guidance needed to make that vision come to life. And so, this is on screen. You can kind of see our planning framework adopted within that plan, and it identifies the subsequent levels of guidance that we do need. So you see here underneath the comprehensive plan, level 2 are strategic plans, which are more citywide. They provide more details of the comprehensive plan. For example, the strategic mobility plan provides guidance on how to realize goal 5, which is creating safe and equitable mobility choices. And then level 3 is kind of where we are today. That's the community area plans, which provide more guidance for appropriate land uses, building form, and infrastructure needed throughout each plan geography. And then there is actually another level below that, which is specific plans, and those provide a focus on a smaller geography than even the CAP stuff, and it provides more guidance for like the implementation of specific projects. So it is important to note that levels 2 through 4 do build upon that vision and goals that was outlined in the comprehensive plan. So the community area plans are really essentially about creating complete communities. So that means creating places that integrate housing, job opportunities, daily goods in a more accessible manner. And so, in other words, where you live, work, and play in this environment you live. So, specifically for CAP, they were developed with a 5 phase process. It occurred over the last 2 years. We've had multiple engagement opportunities in each phase, and then the outcomes of each phase have been shared along the way. They're available on our website and they're listed here. And so that's kind of how our schedule has gone. Currently, we are in phase 5. So we're working towards review and adoption, which is part of why we're here today for this webinar. So this slide kind of summarizes that engagement I mentioned, phases 1 through phase 4. We've had interactions with over 400,000 people, 6,000 plus in person from things like workshops, going out to different events and meeting people there. And then we've also received around 1,700 comments so far throughout these phases. And then, so the plans were developed using kind of a systematic process, which means that they've developed in the same way and will have like the same components and formats within them between each different geography. So, like, while plans developed systematically, while they were developed systematically, each plan also does include some unique contents that reflect the individual character of each geography and some new common policy guidance that helps achieve the vision. And then these plans also provide a common set of considerations for all decision makers to ensure we're being consistent and evaluating things consistently in line with that vision. And so over time, these considerations will help ensure growth that's accommodated in a way that respects established neighborhoods, aligns growth with our infrastructure capacity, and then also create like a vibrant mixed use centers for everyone. So now kind of getting into North Inner specifically, here you'll see that it is organized based on this table of contents, and this is going to be the same throughout all plans. Like I said, there is going to be some things that change from plan to plan that are area specific, but they're going to be organized the same way. So I'm going to keep this table just to keep track of things as we go. So the first thing we're going to look at here is chapter 3, which outlines the geography's greatest needs and prioritized goals. So the needs are focused on increasing access to housing choices, job opportunities, daily goods and services, and then reducing environmental impacts. So the plans focused on these four needs because these are metrics that were identified in the comprehensive plan as paramount for ensuring that future growth benefits as many people as possible. The 10 comprehensive plan goals were linked to these four metrics. And so if a metric scored less than 5, the associated goals were identified as priorities for the geography. But all goals are important, and these are just a prioritized list to help with prioritizing limited dollars or resources within that area. So, moving to the next one, looks
I have a
like,
question about that
sure,
last slide.
yeah, absolutely. Apologies. Yeah, let me go back. This one?
Yes. So for environmental justice, the
Mhm.
measures are proximity to heavy industrial uses, proximity to major transportation infrastructure. Um, those are features that affect the score. Is that correct? That help
Correct.
determine that score. Okay. All right.
Yes, so yes, these scores are based off of data, and those are the specific measures that were looked at. Like the
Okay.
data was pulled for those different things, and all of that together led to the overall score.
All right.
Yeah,
So 3 is a priority. All right. Thank you.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. Absolutely. Anything below a 5 is a priority, so 3 is definitely a priority.
Okay. Thank
Um,
you.
absolutely. So the next chapter after that one is chapter 4, which focuses on recommended development patterns for the geography via the 2040 policy map, which you'll see. Oh, sorry, Terry. One moment. Is everyone else able to hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So let me respond to him real quick. Um, Let me just give him a little assistance real quick. All right, let's hope that helps. I'll come back to any questions that he has, but I'll keep going for you all while he's figuring that out. And I'll let our techs know. So let me come back to where we are. So chapter 4 is creating complete communities. And like I mentioned, this is going to kind of be via the 2040 policy map. The colors on the map relate to the types and intensity of development that's appropriate in that area. And to learn more about these colors, which are place types, there is place type descriptions located in the appendix. And the appendix is a separate document on the plan site, but it is the same for all documents. So there is only one appendix. And so that does outline place type descriptions, goes into more details about those. And then another note is that is important is that the plans recommend a large portion of the geography to remain as is. So meaning if redevelopment occurs in these areas, like especially neighborhood 1, then the new development should match the scale and intensity of development on the ground today. Specifically for North Inner, the plan recommends that 41% of existing development is meant to evolve into a different type of development. But that is in this area specifically. One of those kind of changes to note would be M&L, which is manufacturing and logistics, to IMU, and I'll go into that a little bit further in the next slides. But this targeted amount of change will hopefully help accommodate the projected growth in the area in a way that respects neighborhoods, pairs growth with infrastructure capacity, and creates mixed use centers, which will help with some of that access across Charlotte that we mentioned previously and the community needs. So this map is expected to change over time, and there is guidance in the program guide, specifically Table 3 and the minor map amendment criteria that ensures future requests are aligned with our growth strategy. So there is guidance for that and specific criteria for amendments to the policy map. So on this page, as I mentioned before, there is some recommended types of change for each geography. I highlighted as I mentioned, M&L to IMU is a big one for this area. And so this helps to advance some of this geography's priority goals, seeing as especially environmental is highlighted as a high goal for this area. I'll quickly switch back to this page just to reference. This bottom paragraph specifically highlights what are the greatest needs. And so for North Inner, it is to mitigate environmental impacts and then more access to daily goods and services along with housing choices. So that is here, those goals that I mentioned that are aligned with that type of change. The plan does kind of go into how this recommended change aligns with the goals that are a priority for this area. And we can get further into the details on that if you guys have questions.
Hi,
So,
I do have a
I have
question.
a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
No, go ahead.
So the question I have is just related to the environmental concerns. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
yeah, absolutely. I'll skip ahead and then we'll come back to this toolkit and mobility section. So as I mentioned for this area, our some of our priorities here, especially are environmental justice and sustainability. So in this section of the plan, which for you all, let me double check my page number here real quick. So this again is the supporting the vision section. And so the environmental section for this area starts on page 58. So on page 58, we start looking at evaluating the current kind of conditions for environmental justice and sustainability, which includes within the assessment, tree canopy, impervious surfaces, proximity to heavy industrial, proximity to major transportation infrastructure, and then floodplains. So as you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, you've got that assessment table and some more information on what do those metrics really mean. But then we also have a map that shows kind of the urban heat in the area as well, which is something that has been identified as a need here in Charlotte. And so this section is actually pretty new. It is one that was recognized as a need, and so there has been a bigger effort to highlight basically environmental justice and sustainability across all plans, but specifically using these metrics. So, is there anything specific within those contents you wanted me to kind of go into a little bit further?
I do have questions about it.
Sure.
So first, when you look at the map
Mhm.
that shows the land uses,
Mhm.
um, is there a way to tell how those that are on the map differ from what has been the historical?
Yes, so the place type designations were based on the existing land uses. So they are reflective of what is there pretty much, unless somebody has gone through a rezoning or an area has been identified as needing to change. For example, there has been areas that were the existing land use was manufacturing and logistics, but because the area might be changing or there's surrounding conditions on the revised policy map, which is also going to be up for adoption, that is not currently adopted. The existing policy map is based on the existing land uses today. That was not, there was no like recommendations for what it should or could be. Currently, the adopted policy map is a reflection of the existing land use. So, for example, manufacturing and logistics, you do see a lot of that in this area. Let me kind of go back to that map. So we do have a large portion of this area that is manufacturing and logistics. And so if we're looking at that and we're thinking about kind of the typical environment you're going to find with manufacturing and logistics, that is going to contribute especially to environmental because of things like impervious surfaces, how much tree canopy do we have in those areas? I mean, proximity to heavy industrial, you're definitely thinking manufacturing and logistics. And then, floodplains, of course, are a thing, but mostly if we're looking at manufacturing and logistics, those things are going to come into play on that score. And so, North Inner having a large portion of manufacturing and logistics, we have recognized that that is not the ideal condition. The ideal condition is not to have people living next to these kind of industrial areas. It was a large conversation in the first portion of CAP. We actually posed that question to people of like, jobs are a priority, access to jobs is a priority, but environmental justice and sustainability is a priority as well. So, like, what as a community is our priority here? Do we look at really, really pushing and having a lot of these areas transition to IMU or something else? But what we heard from the community is that essentially these are equal priorities to both have environmental justice and also jobs, because as we know, manufacturing and logistics does contribute to jobs and stuff like that.
Well, Matt,
So,
if I could stop there,
yeah,
jobs don't have to be manufacturing and
true.
logistics. And I've heard this said before that you've talked to the community, and I wanted to point out that, you know, I think it's safe to say everyone would prefer greener jobs than
Of course.
manufacturing and logistics, just to add that to the conversation.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And some of these other place types too have a high focus on jobs. Our activity centers, especially, are meant to be areas that do combine not just one thing. We have our traditional land uses that did kind of identify like a singular use. Our hopes with the place type tools that we have now are that you know, we may not be able to go back and change that, like, that's how our jobs were put and where they were put. But what we can do is try and make sure that the place types we have to provide that guidance in the future are more holistic. I think in general, we are really hoping that those activity centers become job centers where you can have access to not just your job, but you can work and live and play. Those were kind of our place type categories that we can create places where you can do more than just work or just, go to the park, where you can live there and work there and still have incorporated healthy open space and environmental consideration. So you're completely right. I mean, that's not the only kind of job, and we do not want to, push that is the only kind of job for sure.
I
We
think
only, yeah.
I think when I hear the presentations on the area plan, that is for NI, it's presented as a choice between the two. And I've consistently heard it that residents wanted jobs, but the implication is that for NI, they have to be manufacturing. And then to go back to my question, I was asking um, whether the map shows new proposed or new land uses or existing.
Hmm.
You said existing.
Hmm.
The other part of my question was if you are going to address sustainability and environmental justice, what's the rationale between keeping everything the same?
So the policy map does not indicate what. So let me go back to your initial thing. Um, I want to make sure that I'm clear about the conversation we had around that. So we did not present it as it's either jobs or this. What we did is we identified conditions that were not ideal, i.e., manufacturing and logistics next to housing. That is not an ideal situation. We recognize that. The community recognizes that. So the conversations we had were about this condition exists across the city. What do we do about it? So, what came out of that conversation was yes, there is a priority for both. So nobody wants to just nix one or the other. But what we need to do is, and so what we post back is what can we do to make those boundaries safer, healthier, all that kind of stuff. So it was not a which one, it was for us, it was more a what do we do when this condition exists and people don't want to move and they don't want to move the jobs. What do we do? And so that was really the core of the conversation because we recognized, we can't always pick things up and move them, but what do we do when we can't and we still don't think that condition is right? Like
I
that's
think
not a condition we want to continue.
I think you just restated that by saying you don't want to move the jobs when there is an option for a different type of jobs.
I That's not what I'm intending to say here by any means. We just as a our job is not does not cover what like that is up to the people who own those properties. All we can do is identify what is there through the policy map and then provide guidance through the revised map and these plans of a more ideal situation. So when we are recommending that an area may be changed from MNL to IMU, we're suggesting that if this were to change, if this manufacturing and logistics area were to no longer be currently used as that, what happens when the business closes and that area is up for redevelopment? If we say, hey, our recommendation is that in the future this does evolve into a more mixed use area, that gives the surrounding community options for not just keeping manufacturing and logistics forever and ever.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Like this is giving that opportunity for it to develop into more.
So if the land use designations are not changing, when would we see that opportunity to change the use?
So as I mentioned back on this slide, let me find it. So the way that I'm trying to find where we were, the way that the policy map changes is through either a rezoning, but again, even if it's going through a rezoning, there's criteria. So what I mentioned when I mentioned the amendment criteria is, and that is within the program guide, I believe. I'll have to double check through my notes, but the way that the policy map changes is through meeting certain criteria, and typically that's going to be through the rezoning process. So somebody buys a property and they want to change it or something like that, but there is criteria that needs to be met for something to change to a different place type.
Okay.
Mostly we do see that through rezonings
So
or through, I think there's some other, I'd have to look specifically into the criteria, but that's mostly how we see it.
So you mentioned some of this because NI has this purple area, this huge concentration of manufacturing and industrial that does create the potential for environmental injustice. So you've
Mhm.
mentioned that there are areas where there has, I'm trying to understand this part, has been a recommendation to shift from manufacturing and logistics, that big purple area that doesn't always exist in other parts of the city. Are you saying that there are recommendations in place to kind of ease that in recognition of the environmental burden there?
So yes, what we did, and this is the slide that you're talking about, we identified that within this area, there is manufacturing and logistics that based on previous community conversations, there would be a potential opportunity here to see that evolve if possible. Like if this is a possible thing to happen through, you know, amendment criteria, rezonings and things like that, that this is a good opportunity to take existing manufacturing and logistics and for it to transition into innovation mixed use so that it supports these priority goals for the area. So we are saying this would be a good thing for this area.
Okay. And how is that reflected on the map, or how do we see the areas where this could potentially happen?
So, as I mentioned, and we were talking about, the map is based off of existing land use. So, again, we don't necessarily control what is there, but what we did with the policy map is create a very clear map that shows what's there. And then the revised policy map will have some changes that are based on things like entitlements, other criteria that required things to change, or map refinements that were identified throughout the process as the community reviewed that. And so really the way to identify what could change is going to be through that kind of like, Kathy, how would you describe like,
So, hey, Karen, the policy map is aspirational, and there was a lot
yeah.
of, you and I talked the other day that there are a lot of inputs into uh, previously adopted future land use plans, existing entitlements, et cetera, that went into that map. This guidance here is in addition to the map. We know that there will be changes and possibly changes happen through the rezoning process. This gives other criteria of what is looked at and the types of changes that we can expect to see. So really, if you look at most of the areas, probably a majority of it, almost 60 to 70%, is going to stay the same. The activity centers, your centers, are where you typically will see the most change. The most likely change for areas that are manufacturing and logistic would be to innovation mixed use, which allows those uses to continue today, but provides the opportunity, like for a Camp North End or those types of things. If there's other uses that it begins to transition to, it allows existing businesses to continue to operate, but gives an idea, gives some other options of other types of uses that could be integrated in there.
Okay. All right. Thanks for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.
Think there did the other.
Yeah, I think we've got
okay.
some hands up. Stephanie, I think you were next, and then Manifa, I think you're after her. So Stephanie, did you have a question? All right, we'll give her a minute to come back. Manifa, if you want to go ahead and ask a question if you still have one.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for providing that explanation, because this is concerning that there's so much of our community that is manufacturing and potential environmental injustices that will occur. The question that I have, so what I'm hearing you say is that this current plan basically is impacted by the policy, but in order for us to advocate for change in our community, it would need to go through rezoning, correct? Because this isn't the actual, so this is the current present day map and plan. However, is that not correct?
So this is the policy map is aspirational. It means,
Correct.
what I mean by that is it doesn't, it's very confusing, understandably, that if you have three different maps, you have what something might be zoned today. That's our official zoning map. That's a regulatory map. That might be different from what we expect to happen in the future, which is this map that you're looking at right here. The policy may or may not. And then there's what is there today, which also could be different from the other two maps. It is confusing, but this map, as part of there is around the community instances where you have manufacturing and logistics that bump up against neighborhood one, which is not an ideal condition. It's not a condition that was created overnight either, or by any of these things. It's happened over the years. And in the comprehensive plan in the resources section, we have an equity atlas and also a growth factors report that gives a lot of details about how we got to where we are today of our community's growth and development. So what I'm trying to say in that is that these are not conditions that are going to change overnight either. Number one. And number two is that this situation, like I mentioned, happens different places throughout the community. And as part of phase 2 of this project, which focused on revisions to the policy map, we typically would have 2 or 3 different areas we would look at in workshops with the community and discuss. This is one where there are 2 competing goals next to each other. The community prioritized jobs, and they also prioritize protecting existing established neighborhoods. So one question we asked is, does one priority outweigh another? And the overwhelming answer that we received was, no, it does not. So I understand and I hear what everyone is saying, but in these instances, these are existing manufacturing with existing businesses. To recognize them as something different right now doesn't fit. However, does it mean that they could not change over the next 20 years? No. And so that image or slide that Maddie had earlier gives an idea of what is a likely transition and how would that happen.
Yeah.
Okay, and so for me, I guess the only concern I would have is that, so we're looking at an aspirational map and then there's 3 other maps. So how can we truly advocate for our community and really understand the direction if we have an aspirational map and then three other maps. So it seems like it's difficult to kind of really grasp what is happening.
Yeah, great question. So plans, all of those, the existing map is just, let's put that to the side because that's just a snapshot of what exists today. It's just a documentation. The zoning map and the policy map, yes, they're two different maps, but okay, let me back up to say that these plans are implemented in a number of different ways. So one of those ways is through the rezoning process. When folks come in to rezone property, because there are market factors and other things that plans can't anticipate. We recognize that. But if we have a plan and we experience some different idea or some shock to the system like COVID was, or other things, recessions, et cetera, we know where we were going. So we better know how to pivot and adapt based on what those circumstances might be. So that is the guidance that your policy document sets forth. It is not law like zoning is, but zoning has to be based on your policies. And there's actually state legislation that was adopted in 2021 that now very specifically says that. So that's the purpose of the policy document. It sets forth the vision that you can then write regulations around. So in terms of zoning, the zoning map, it can change too. It just has to go through a separate process. And people do that every month through the rezoning process. These plans, though, also provide guidance around capital investments. And what is the key piece for that is more the assessments that Maddie probably reviewed around what are the mobility needs of this particular geography. Those can differ depending on what part of the community you are. Mobility tends to be a hot subject no matter where you are in Charlotte. So there's that piece. There's the open space piece, community character, and environmental justice and sustainability, and then public services. So this is very new and much more detailed information than we've ever had in any of our plans before, that really paints a picture of what are the greatest needs for each of these geographies. And as development occurs, and as projects, capital funds become available, we know better how to prioritize those things and how to address them.
I don't see how to raise my hand here. How do I do that?
Let's see here. There, if you go to the bottom, your ribbon on the bottom, can you just hover over it with your cursor?
Yeah.
There's a little heart that says react.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go there. Yeah.
And we have a small enough group that if anybody's having trouble, you're also welcome to come off mute.
Yeah. Stephanie, were you able to get off mute?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Because I work for the architect firm, so I think this is a very big topic for us. Is we having a project like airport. So when when you live in a nearby the airport, you need to do like before you do the runway, you have to do a public assessment. So everything is, I just want to know if City of Charlotte have done anything to historic data to figure out is any of the city had done what City of Charlotte plan to do on 2040. Do you have a historic data to support is this gonna work for City of Charlotte?
You mean these area plans specifically, or
yeah, because you are using the manufacturer and then the residential, you're gonna like a mixed use area. Do you have any city historic data? You have done it already. So City of Charlotte is more like a modification or more like a just create another one. Do you have any historic data you have been done it already?
There have been several studies. I think this is what you're asking, but I'm not exactly sure. As part of the as part of phase one, which is really documenting and doing research and et cetera, like you're talking about.
Right.
There was a market analysis done, and there was also in partnership with economic development, there was an
Okay.
industrial uses study done as
Mhm.
well that talks about, for example, one thing that it discussed that kind of supports the innovation mixed use
Hmm.
is for some of our older manufacturing and logistics uses, some of those existing buildings can't really accommodate the needs
Hmm.
of more current manufacturing needs.
Hmm.
So some of those can begin to transition. So that factored into it as well. But yes, there were a variety of different studies. And then I would also suggest under our resources page on the main Charlotte Future 2040 website,
Hmm.
you can see all of those different studies, and there were quite a few of them as well. Like I mentioned, the growth factors report and
Okay.
the equity atlas.
Hmm.
Those are on there as well. And those are great pieces of information that provide really a good historic context for Charlotte's growth over a number of years.
Do you have
I'll put
any
that in the
manufacturer?
chat. I'll put that
Uh,
in the chat. Keep going,
okay.
Stephanie.
Do you have any manufacturer that currently is already working with City of Charlotte and transition into this nuisance area? So that way, City of Charlotte kind of know who's gonna be there. It's just same thing like the new administration, they bring in 10 different manufacturer come back to US or the new manufacturer from overseas. So is City of Charlotte's plan to do like a 2030 for the Earth Day, like New York proposed for the substantial green city, is City of Charlotte planning to do that? You know, like you
Not,
already have
not,
manufacturer being signed up for?
yeah, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Typically, that would be something more our economic development department
Hmm.
would do. I haven't heard anything specifically. That doesn't mean it's not something they're thinking about.
Right.
But right now, just Monday night, Charlotte's Strategic Energy Action Plan was
Hmm.
approved, so that kind of fits a little bit into what you're referring to, I think. So we already had a plan. This is Strategic Energy Action Plan Plus that kind of adds a few more features to it. And
Right.
that was approved Monday night.
Okay. Because the same thing like a New York City, they have investment. Then there's a new project coming up, and like a 500,000 investment from invite from overseas and it's coming to a new city to the investing. So I want to see if the city of Charlotte plan to do exactly the same kind of approach from
Gotcha. I
you.
see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think Karen, you had your hand up next. I'm also going to share that CAP link in the chat in case anybody's interested in that.
Mhm.
Yes, and I'm happy to have you wait and answer my question if there's more of the presentation that you need to cover. But
Sure.
I'd like to know, um, you have the priorities identified for North Ennard with environmental justice ranking as a 3. How do you plan to move the needle on that? And again, you can wait and answer that if you have more of the presentation to cover.
Um, Kathy, do you want to maybe take a quick stab at that one and then we'll get back to the presentation? I think there's
Yeah.
a
So if you want to go to that page, Maddie. So
That's fine.
we do have an implementation plan. Let me get this a little bit more. A couple things, Karen. We do have an implementation plan, and most of these sections. So, for example, mobility, environmental justice and sustainability to some extent, public facilities, and I'd say open space. Those aren't projects that would be under planning. They would be the work of our partners. So for a couple of things, I know that the Office of Sustainability, as far as urban heat and the Strategic Energy Action Plan, we've also partnered with UNC Charlotte on a lot of this urban heat data. This is new information for us. So those are probably more emerging projects, but the Strategic Energy Action Plan is one of those earlier projects. Also, just in the tree canopy, the tree programs that we have, those are under planning. That would address that. Impervious surface, really, a lot of that is in site planning work and in other sections of the UDO. So there's a variety of things that are small that we are doing. I mentioned the proximity to industrial. That's something we've looked at, but a lot of them don't. Number one, with this particular section, they don't have easy answers. Number two is when we've looked at it and looked at earlier on in phase two, like what are different mapping approaches, there's not an answer in terms of mapping. So this is probably the most multi-pronged section in terms of addressing it. But we do have a number of policies, and Maddie's showing them here to help mitigate those. And again, most of them, if you look in the implementation section, most of them fall under our partner organizations.
And what Kathy's speaking to is down here in the implementation guide area, those policies we were just talking about. You'll see what type it is, who would be the lead on that, and if there's other support, what's the time frame look like, and then what are some other related policies within the comprehensive plan.
And specifically, the proximity of residential to industrial. What does the document say about that? Yeah.
It's not a condition that we want to replicate. So moving forward, there are things that have happened in the growth in our community, and we're very transparent about it in the resource documents that I mentioned to you, that have happened over time that we don't want to repeat. So a lot of this is moving forward to make sure that there are policies in place to make sure that situation doesn't happen again. But as I mentioned also, there's not an easy mapping answer. There are transitions and other things that are built into the zoning districts, but there's not an easy way to ameliorate that overnight. Another option is, as I mentioned, the innovation mixed use, allowing that transition to happen where if there's existing uses, we want existing businesses to continue to thrive in our community. There needs to be a place for manufacturing uses. They are one type of employment source. So really allowing that gentle transition so that existing businesses can continue to operate until they're ready to transition to something else. So those are the things that really I'd highlight.
Okay. And Maddie, could you link to this page? And then Kathy, does the plan to mitigate the concentration, or is there a plan to address the concentration of industrial in NI?
There's not a specific, I guess I'm not exactly sure
so
what you're looking for.
As the city continues to grow, of course, our concern would be we don't want to have this expand and that other parts of the city should share this environmental burden, that all of this should not be clustered in communities that have, for too many decades, had the greatest share of the burden. So does the plan address future growth for and preventing future growth so that all of this is not concentrated, or so much of this is not concentrated in NI?
Well, if you look at some of the environmental justice recommendations, they do address the first one that Maddie's highlighting, for example, to ensure future residents do not live near undesirable or unhealthy land uses, residential development in areas designated manufacturing and logistics. So yes, moving forward, I feel like we do.
Yeah,
I think I'm asking it the opposite way. So the way item one reads here is that you want to continue that pattern of concentrating it here, but avoid putting residential near that category. What I'm asking is, does the plan prevent an expansion of this when NI already has a disproportionate share of
so
the land
one
use?
one thing I'll note is, and I'm one of the staff that participates in the rezoning process, and I think what stands out during that is the criteria I mentioned earlier. Part of the criteria that we use to evaluate any sort of changes through the rezoning process does outline, like, um what's the word when one place type is next to another place type. I'm having a
Transitions
transitions, but then
and
also
adjacencies.
adjacency. Yes, adjacencies. So part of the criteria does look at adjacencies, so that it is hopefully, ideally, preventing those conditions from happening again. So those conditions, like those adjacencies, are in that criteria so that when we evaluate a change, we have that to look at and say, no, this would not be supported because it is not meeting the criteria, i.e., it is next to something it shouldn't be next to, or it's not next to something it should be next to. So that is baked into those criteria that is used daily to evaluate things like rezonings and future development. Kathy, I don't know if you had something else to add to that too.
No, that's fine. Is there something specific that you're looking for,
Yeah,
Karen, or some
yeah.
suggestions you have? We're happy to take those.
Yes, I would say that I think we would want to prevent a growth of this land use. And I know when we talked before, you said there's nowhere else to put it. And so that is concerning that you're saying there was nowhere where else to put.
I don't remember saying that, and I don't think I would say that. What I may have said was that they are existing businesses today, and I think I've said that here today too, that have entitlements as well. So if you're looking for us to go and correctively rezone properties to something different, I don't think we're going to be able to do that.
No, what I was suggesting is preventing expansion of this.
And there are policies that do not encourage expansion of this in the areas that you're talking about. But if it is already, Charlotte does have manufacturing corridors, and they're not just in Northeast and in the North Inner. There are other areas around. It's not that they're all concentrated in this one geography. And so those are seen as job hubs and a necessary thing in our community, like gas stations are and other things. So I don't think that, there's expansion beyond what exists today recommended or what is entitled today.
Yeah, that's what I'd like clarification on. If there are policies in place to prevent this disproportionate. Yes, there are other areas that have the same land use, but there is a significant concentration here. And what I was asking, if there are policies in place to prevent expansion of this type of land use.
Mm-hmm. There's a table on page 21 of the document that breaks down the existing to recommended place types that could be helpful to you, and it's on page 21.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
then there's
that's,
some discussion about anticipated change as well.
yeah,
Okay.
So if there's additional language you think that could be added to the plans,
Okay.
we're happy to consider that. And we would
yeah.
encourage you to comment on that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And we're gonna take, Manifa will take your last question, and then I am gonna have to go ahead and switch to our next plan because it is 6. So Manifa, if you don't mind, happy to take your question before we close up and switch.
Yes, actually may be outside of scope for you all, but it is a curiosity question. Being
Sure.
that this is a long-term and this is the history of this community. Has there ever been any health studies to determine the impact that this environmental, and that may fall into public health and Dr. Washington, but communities that have high manufacturing, of course, have higher rates of cancer, respiratory illnesses, birth defects. So has there ever been any conversation on how this plan will impact the health of the community?
So the urban heat data that's in here is very new. I think this is an emerging piece for the city. To to be honest, like most of that health collection data, most of it happens at the county level. So a lot of the work that we've done here is new for us, and I think we will continue to expand upon that. There also is in the neighborhood profile areas that I don't know if you're familiar with those, but it's not specifically what you're asking for in terms of like looking at it in terms of proximity to manufacturing, but it does give some good data around health measures that I think would be helpful as well. And our part of the reason we have these geographies laid out the way we do, because folks sometimes say, oh, it splits a neighborhood, or that's not what I would consider my geography, but they line up with the neighborhood profile areas. So for data collection purposes, we're all measuring things the same way. And as we track it over time and continue to improve in that way, we're all using the same numbers and starting from the same place. But that is definitely something that I think is an emerging theme for us, or we are learning more about how to do that better.
And I'll also add to that effect too, if you want to kind of dig further into those assessments in the appendix, you can find some information on those assessments as well that kind of digs into the methodology and how we did those. So that might answer some more questions of yours. And so that is going to be in the appendix. Hope that answered your question. So thank you all who came to talk about North Inner. Please feel free, as Kathy mentioned, we would highly encourage you to add your comments to those plans. And we are going to go ahead and switch to East Inner. Anyone is welcome to join that conversation as well and stay, or you're welcome to go to a different room if there's a different plan that you're interested in. But there's some links in the chat, so make sure you grab those if you wanted any. And we're going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and get my slides set up for East Inner. So anyone who's going to stay for East Inner, just hold on and I'll get that set up.
Could I speak with Monifa to say I just reached out to you on LinkedIn, Monifa?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I would love if we all can connect. And Karen, I definitely would like to connect with you as well.
Sounds
Thank you.
great. Thank you very much, Kathy and Maddie.
Absolutely. And if you guys have further questions, you can always contact us at cltfuture2040@charlottenc.gov. I will put that in the chat for you all. And again, thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.